If you're sort of confused about what's going on in the Karen Reed case, don't worry, you're not alone. I'm Catherine Loftus. This is Not My Objection. And I'm here to break down, like, what is procedurally going on. There's a number of different cases. There's people saying they're going to file lawsuits. There's people not filing lawsuits. So here we go. We have two basic cases. Number one is in Bristol County Superior Court. The other is in Plymouth Superior Court. The first case that was to be filed. Now, these are all civil matters. Remember, Karen Reed was convicted of only one count of OUI, and she was acquitted of all other charges. Subsequently, she was sued by the John O'Keefe estate for wrongful death. Also named in that lawsuit was the bar C.F. McCarthy's as well as Waterfall. That is what we saw in court today, Friday, November 21st, at 2 p.m. in Plymouth County. A number of people had questions this morning because on the list, remember we have a case. This is my future show called Call the List. That's what we have in court. Usually there's a 9 a.m. call the list, there's a 2 p.m. call the list. Now, Judge Cannoni is normally assigned to this session, but because this case is specially assigned to now Mark Gilday, it was taken over for Judge O'Shea because he's retiring. What happens is that a judge in Superior Court sits in one session for 3 months. And if there's a case that comes into that session and is assigned that session, but there needs to be another judge hearing it, basically what that judge does, like Cannoni, is just gets off the bench and the other judge comes on, hears it, and then they switch back. So there was a lot of kerfluffle about the fact that the list said Cannoni as a session judge, but she was not. Now, in the wrongful death suit, they are currently in discovery. That's what the issue here today was, because you have plaintiff's attorney, Mark Dilla, and then you have Karen Reed's attorneys, the bar attorneys, and I think there's somebody in some capacity as her personal attorney, certain Alan Jackson. And what the civil cases are different than criminal because you have levels of insurance that are coming in. So you have insurance defense firms that represent both C.F. McCarthy's and Waterfall. And then you have what I presume to be insurance companies either from her auto, maybe she had an umbrella. So there's different levels of insurance. And that comes sort of into play in civil cases. Who's going to resolve for what? I presume at some point the bars are going to want to settle. But they've been in the discovery phase for quite some time. This was filed in 2024. However, if you recall, it was stayed as a result of the criminal trial. Damon Seligson originally came in on behalf of Bill Reed, and I believe Janet and someone else, asking basically to not force them to testify in a deposition because of the criminal case. And so that was all stayed. And what that means is that there was sort of a pause on the litigation, that there were no depositions taken. I'm sure there was paper discovery back and forth. That's requests for production of documents, interrogatories, things like that. Keeper of the record subpoena. So what today was a Zoom hearing with Judge Gilday. It's his first appearance on the case. And what he essentially was trying to figure out was like, okay, like where are we in terms of like discovering what needs to be done? Now, we didn't hear the first part of it. It was cut off from the Zoom, and I don't know if it's subsequently been posted anywhere. But what we got in the Zoom was the end of Mark Dilla making an argument, which sounds like it was some sort of motion to compel discovery from the defendants, at least Karen Reed's defendants. It sounds like both the Waterfall and C.F. McCarthy's are compliant with their discovery obligations. And what Judge Gilday did after both attorneys went back and forth was said, okay, why don't we consider this a 9C conference? In Massachusetts, we have a rule called 9A. You guys have heard me, if you've heard me talk about motions before in the civil session, it's always governed by 9A because the court likes to decide wants the parties to decide as many of the issues outside of the court as possible. So what happens is in Superior Court Rule 9A, if you're going to file a motion, you're required to have what's called a 9C conference under the 9A statute, which says you have to call the other side or have some sort of meeting and confer about the issues and try to resolve as many of these issues before you bring the issue to the court to decide. So what Judge Gilday said was, okay, why don't we consider this conference, this hearing, a 9C conference, and said, okay, Mr. Dilla, file whatever motion you want. So file the motion to compel. It's going to be due by December 2nd. That's the Tuesday after Thanksgiving. The defendant's response is due December 12th. And then they're going to have a hearing on Zoom December 19th at 2 p.m. Now, what they were also discussing was the Bristol County Superior Court case, which is the Karen Reed case versus Michael Proctor, Buchanan, Tully, Albert, Brian Albert, Nicole Albert, Jennifer McCabe, Matthew McCabe, and Brian Higgins. So they're going to be suing both the state police as well as the town of Canton, but they have not yet made presentment. That's in footnote number 1. What that means is if you're going to sue a municipality or a government entity in Massachusetts, it's covered under the Tort Claims Act, Chapter 258. And basically what it says is you have to follow a very specific procedural requirement. You have to serve notice, usually on council, for the town or for the state police, whoever is the designated representative. They have a certain amount of time to respond. If they don't respond, then they can file a lawsuit. I believe it's 6 months those served have to respond. That's what they were talking about in today's hearing, that Karen Reed's team and the Bristol matter is negotiating sort of a shortened presentment period so that they can respond. And that's what they talked about with Judge Gilday today. Essentially, like, all these cases, they're all relevant to each other in terms of, like, they involve the same people, the same issues, but they're different claims. Like, they shouldn't be litigated together, in my opinion. You know, you have, like, civil rights claims and defamation, then you have wrongful death. Like, those are two very different things. But I do think it makes sense to consolidate them for discovery purposes, for purposes of depositions, for purposes of fact discovery, you know what I mean, all the paper discovery, all that kind of stuff. I think it makes sense. You know, this is an interesting complaint. What I would say to people is a civil complaint, particularly one that the parties know is going to be publicized. It's very much like the O'Keefe wrongful death complaint. Like, you know, it's persuasive writing. It's made to persuade. So if you believe the O'Keefes, you know, Karen Reed backed up into him, hit him, killed him, and then did all these things to cover it up and then harass the family and all that kind of stuff. If you believe this, then, you know, the state police are the bad actors and Karen Reed was framed. So it's important to remember that allegations are just allegations, and you can say virtually anything. You do have to have a good faith basis as a lawyer. And I do know that there are some discrepancies in here that kind of go what came out in testimony and evidence in the criminal case, but maybe I'll go through it a little bit more. Probably not. I think ultimately you're probably going to see some motions to dismiss for some of them. You're going to see either counterclaims from the Alberts, McCabe's, Higgins, all that kind of stuff, or you'll see separate claims filed against Reed and Kearney, and then maybe they join those for purposes of discovery. So this is complicated, and I would advise everybody to buckle your seats and take a deep breath, because this is a long and slow ride. I hope everybody has a happy Friday. See you soon.
If you like this episode, please comment, like, share, and subscribe. Every bit helps. Thanks for watching Note My Objection. See you next week.